Welcome to Flutter Doctor and to this new widget peels series in which we'll see many of the Flutter widgets and explain them in short but detailed videos. In this one we will see column and row, which are two of the main Flutter layout widgets that leverage the Flexbox layout system. So first of all, a little introduction. As I've said, Flutter uses Flexbox, that is a layout model that allows you to easily arrange some child widgets by modulating their sizes and respective proportions. And the widgets we're going to see are column and row, which allow respectively to lay their children vertically and horizontally. So for column, the main axis is the y-axis, the vertical one, as you can see here on the right. And row is basically the same, just the main axis changes and it's now the horizontal one. And which are the key properties of these two classes? Children, of course, that is a list of widgets that you need to lay out using the Flexbox system. And the two alignment properties that control respectively the alignment along the main axis, that for column is the vertical one and for row the horizontal one, and the cross-axis alignment that controls the alignment along the perpendicular axis. And now let's see an example. So here I have a very simple app with just a scaffold, an app bar and a body with a placeholder text. And I have launched this app inside my Android emulator. And now I want to replace this text placeholder with a column. And in this column, I want to put a simple container with a color of blue, colors.blue, a height of 40 and a width of 40 as well. I'll save this and hot reload the app. And as you can see, I have this blue square. Actually, let's make this another color, otherwise it confuses with the app bar. So it is red. And now I'm going to create two more of these boxes by duplicating this line and changing just the color and green. So I'll save and reload. And here I have these three boxes. So as you can see, it is not mandatory to specify the alignment properties. And basically what happens by default is that if you do not specify any alignment, all the children are aligned at the start of the column and only take the minimum space they need and do not have any spacing, any gap among them, as you can see. So now I want to change this and start by adding a main axis alignment that is of type main axis alignment dot. And here you can see all the possible properties that it can have. So if I specify main axis alignment dot start, you will see that nothing changes because main axis alignment dot start means the alignment at the top of our vertical axis. And so nothing changes. But if I switch, for instance, to end, of course, you can imagine that the alignment is now at the end of the main axis, which is the vertical one. And if I switch to center, of course, they are now centered. And what are the other possibilities? Well, these three values allow you to place these three widgets in a more geometrical way. I mean, space between means that the first and the last widget go respectively at the top and at the bottom, and they are laid out in a way for which the spacing is placed between the various widgets, as you can see. So there is no spacing at the top and at the bottom. To have not only spacing between the widgets but also around the widgets, we have to switch to space around. As you can see now, each widget has the same spacing at the top and at the bottom. Here you have double the spacing because of course you have both the bottom margin of this widget and the top margin of this yellow one. But the spacing is the same, identical, at the top and at the bottom of each widget. The last possible value is space evenly. And in this case, instead, you have the exact same gap between the top and the first widget, between the widgets themselves and at the bottom. So once again, space between just adds an equal amount of spacing between the first and the second widget and the second and the third, without adding any margins at the top of the axis and at the bottom. Space around adds the same amount of top and bottom margin to each of the children widgets, and space evenly instead places a spacing of equal amount among the three widgets and also the same exact amount of spacing at the bottom and at the top of the axis. And now, of course, if I switch to a row instead of a column, the only thing that changes is that they are arranged with the same approach but along the horizontal axis instead of the vertical one. Now let me switch back to a column. So now let's try to add a cross-axis alignment. And the default value here is cross-axis alignment.center. And by the way, you can check the default values by hovering over the column here. As you can see, the default for the cross-axis alignment is cross-axis alignment.center. But if I save and hot reload, nothing changes because this is the default. But why doesn't it center horizontally our column? So why, in other words, our widgets are still aligned at the start of the horizontal axis, of the cross axis? Well, that's because you are centering them inside a column that by default takes the minimum amount of space that its children require. Because all the children are 40 pixels wide, the column will be 40 pixels wide. And so they are centered actually in that column. They are already centered. That's because the column has the same width of these children. So now, in order to see some changes, let's make the yellow container much wider and reload. As you can see now, the column becomes 140 pixels wide, as much as this container, and the three widgets, now you can see, are centered inside the column. And what if I remove this width property altogether? What happens? Well, the widget without a width by default, and that's a default of the container widget, takes all the space it has horizontally, and so the column adapts itself and becomes as wide as the whole screen. This way, you can see that now all the three widgets are basically centered horizontally in our screen. But of course, we might want to keep the width of this widget at 40 and center this column inside our screen. And to do this is quite simple. We just need to wrap this column with a center widget. And now, if I refresh, as you can see, the column itself, despite still being only 40 pixels wide, is now centered in the screen. Now let me undo this and come back to the previous situation in which we had the center container wider than the others and without the centering. And now I want to show you, to conclude this tutorial, the other options for the cross-axis alignment. So center is the default one, but we also have start, which of course aligns the widgets at the start of the horizontal axis. We also have end, which does the opposite. We have stretch, which automatically stretches the widgets along the cross-axis in a way in which, as you can see, they take the whole space they have available, despite these width properties that are somewhat overridden. Now this concludes this tutorial. Stay tuned and subscribe to the channel because we need to also talk about the expanded widgets that we will use instead of the container in order to also tweak the size ratio among these three widgets. In other words, we will be able to decide, for instance, to have the yellow widget to take 3 times the space of the other two widgets. And thanks to Flexbox, we can be very advanced in setting those proportions with ease by using, once again, the expanded widget. So subscribe because this will be an upcoming video. Thanks for watching, and please add a comment if you have any feedback or doubt on this. Thank you and goodbye.